Hey everyone! Welcome back to the channel. Tonight, I'm diving into some of the most absolutely wild and unsettling Reddit stories that'll make you question just how far people will go when relationships crumble and trust shatters into 1,000 pieces. These aren't just your everyday drama tales. These are stories that cut deep. Stories about betrayal so profound it rewrites entire lives, about toxic relationships that consume everything in their path, and about moments when ordinary people make extraordinary and sometimes terrifying decisions. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable in your favorite spot, and let's explore these stories together. They're perfect for escaping reality for a while, letting the soft sounds of Minecraft blocks being placed wash over you as we delve into the complicated, messy, sometimes frightening world of human relationships at their breaking point. Before we start, I just want to say thank you for being here. Your support means everything to me, and knowing you're out there listening to these stories while I'm here reading them makes this whole experience feel less lonely somehow. The world can be a heavy place, and sometimes we all need to step away from our own problems and lose ourselves in someone else's drama for a little while. That's what tonight is about. Just you, me, some peaceful Minecraft sounds in the background, and stories that'll make you feel grateful for the chaos in your own life. Our first story tonight comes from someone who learned the hard way that the person sleeping next to you can harbour secrets darker than any nightmare. This is a story about discovering that your partner, the person you built a life with, was planning something so unthinkable that even hearing about it secondhand sends chills down your spine. I'm 34 years old, and up until 6 months ago, I thought I had a pretty good handle on my life and my marriage. My husband, Marcus, and I had been together for 9 years, married for 6 of those. We met at a friend's barbecue, where he charmed me with stories about his childhood growing up in rural Montana and his dreams of starting his own business. He was handsome in that rugged way that made you think of cowboys and open spaces, all strong jawline and kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. Within a year, we were living together. Within 3, we were married in a small ceremony by the lake where we'd had our first real date. Marcus worked in commercial real estate, buying and selling properties for various clients. It was decent money, though not spectacular, and he'd always talked about how one day he'd have enough to start flipping houses on his own. I worked as a physical therapist at a local hospital, long hours but rewarding work helping people recover their mobility after surgeries and accidents. We had a nice life together. A 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb, 2 cars, vacations twice a year, the kind of comfortable middle-class existence that you don't really appreciate until it's threatened. But there were things I didn't know, things happening in the shadows of our seemingly normal life that I was completely blind to. Looking back now, there were signs. Small things that didn't quite add up, phone calls Marcus would take in another room, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite make out. The way he'd close his laptop quickly when I walked into his home office. Late nights at work that became more frequent, always with perfectly reasonable explanations that I never thought to question. Why would I? He was my husband. I trusted him completely. The unravelling started on a Tuesday evening in March. I remember the date exactly because it was our anniversary, 6 years married, and Marcus had told me he was taking me somewhere special for dinner. I'd come home early from work, excited to get dressed up, when I noticed his home office door was slightly ajar. This was unusual. Marcus was particular about his workspace, always keeping the door closed when he wasn't in there. He said it helped him maintain boundaries between work and home life. I pushed the door open, not snooping really, just curious. His laptop was open on the desk, screen still lit up. I should have closed it and walked away. I wish I had. But something drew my eye to the screen, an email that was open in his browser. The subject line read, "Payment received, 50% down," and my stomach dropped before I even understood why. The email was from someone using what appeared to be a fake name, just a string of letters and numbers, sent from some encrypted email service I'd never heard of. I sat down in Marcus's chair and started reading. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use the trackpad to scroll. The email confirmed receipt of $25,000, half payment for what it called the agreed-upon service, with the remainder due upon successful completion of the project. There was a name listed, my name, and an address, our address, and the words that made my blood turn to ice. Target confirmed. Timeline estimated at 2 to 3 weeks, depending on circumstances, will make it appear accidental as discussed. I sat there staring at that screen for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. This had to be some kind of mistake, some kind of joke. Maybe Marcus was working on a novel or watching some true crime show and taking notes. But deep down, in that place where your gut instinct lives, I knew this was real. My husband had paid someone $25,000 to kill me. The rational part of my brain wanted to shut down completely, but some survival instinct kicked in. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of everything on that screen. Every email in the thread, and there were several going back 2 months. They discussed methods, discussed timing, discussed how to make my death look like an accident, maybe a home invasion gone wrong or a car accident. The casual way they talked about ending my life, like they were discussing a home renovation project, made me want to vomit right there on Marcus's expensive desk chair. I forwarded all the photos to my personal email and my best friend Christina. Then I deleted the sent messages from Marcus's email so he wouldn't know I'd found anything. My hands were moving on autopilot while my mind raced. How long did I have? When was this supposed to happen? Was the killer already watching me? Already planning? I thought about every stranger I'd seen in the past few weeks, every car that had been parked on our street, every person who'd walked a little too close to me in the grocery store parking lot. And the biggest question of all, the one that made my heart physically ache in my chest: why? Why would Marcus want me dead? We had our problems, like any couple. We'd argued about money occasionally, about whether to have kids, about how much time he spent working, but nothing that seemed worthy of murder. We weren't wealthy enough for a big insurance payout to make sense. We didn't have some dark secret between us that needed to be buried. As far as I knew, Marcus seemed happy. He'd seemed happy that very morning when he kissed me goodbye and told me he was looking forward to our anniversary dinner. I left the office exactly as I'd found it and went to our bedroom in a daze. I sat on the edge of our bed, the same bed where Marcus and I had made love just 2 nights before, and tried to figure out what to do. Call the police seemed like the obvious answer, but what would I tell them? I'd been snooping on my husband's computer and found some emails that might be about hiring someone to kill me. Would they even take me seriously? Would they have enough to arrest Marcus, or would they just warn him, giving him time to accelerate whatever plan he had in motion? I called Christina instead. She worked as a paralegal at a criminal defense firm, and I trusted her judgment. "Chris," I said when she answered, my voice barely above a whisper, even though Marcus wasn't home. "I need help. Something's really wrong." She heard the fear in my voice immediately, told me to stay calm, stay in the house, and that she was calling her boss who would know what to do. 40 minutes later, Christina showed up at my door with James Hartley, one of the senior partners at her firm who specialized in criminal defense. James was in his 50s, grey-haired and serious, with the kind of face that had seen every terrible thing humans could do to each other and had stopped being surprised by any of it. He sat with me at my kitchen table, and I showed him the photos on my phone. He studied each one carefully, his expression never changing, making little notes in a leather notebook he'd brought with him. When he finished, he looked up at me with eyes that were sympathetic but also calculating. "This is serious," he said, which felt like the understatement of the century. "These emails alone are probably enough for the police to open an investigation, but you're right to be cautious. If we go to the police now, Marcus gets arrested, posts bail, and you're potentially in more danger than you are right now because he'll know you found out. Plus, there's a chance the person he hired might still try to complete the job if they've already been paid half." "So what do?" I asked, hearing the tremor in my own voice. "Just wait around to be murdered?" "No," James said firmly. "Here's what we're going to do. First, you're not staying in this house tonight. Christina's going to help you pack a bag. Just essentials. And you're going to stay at a hotel. Use cash. Don't use credit cards. Don't tell anyone except us where you are. Tomorrow morning, I'm going to contact a friend of mine who works with the FBI. These emails suggest interstate communication for the purposes of hiring someone to commit murder, which makes this a federal case. The FBI will take this seriously, and they have resources local police don't have." And that's exactly what happened. I packed a bag with shaking hands while Christina stood guard, checking out the windows every few minutes like she expected masked killers to burst through the door. I left my phone at home, worried it could be tracked, and Christina gave me a burner phone she'd picked up at a convenience store. I wrote Marcus a note saying I was going to spend the night at my sister's house because I wasn't feeling well and didn't want to ruin our anniversary dinner. I hoped it would buy me time before he realized anything was wrong. That night, in a cheap motel room on the edge of town, paid for in cash, I didn't sleep at all. I sat on the uncomfortable bed, staring at the wall, trying to understand how my life had arrived at this moment. I kept thinking about our wedding day, how Marcus had cried when I walked down the aisle. I thought about the vacation we'd taken to Hawaii 2 years ago, how we'd watched the sunset from our hotel balcony, and he'd held me close and told me I was the best thing that ever happened to him. I thought about all the small moments that make up a marriage, making breakfast together on Sunday mornings, arguing over what to watch on Netflix, the way he'd unconsciously reach for my hand when we were walking anywhere. How could all of that have been a lie? How could the same man who remembered my coffee order and bought me flowers for no reason also pay money to have me killed? The next morning, James called me on the burner phone. "The FBI is on it," he said. "They've opened an investigation. They want to meet with you this afternoon to get your statement and see all the evidence. They're also going to send someone to monitor your house to see if Marcus makes any suspicious moves. In the meantime, stay where you are and don't contact Marcus at all." The FBI meeting was surreal. 2 agents, a woman named Sarah Chen and a man named David Rodriguez, met me at James's office. They were both young, probably in their early 30s, but they carried themselves with a confidence that made me feel slightly safer. They asked me to tell them everything, so I did. They looked at the photos I'd taken, asked me dozens of questions about Marcus's behavior, his finances, his friends, anything that might help them understand what was happening. "Do you have any joint bank accounts?" Agent Chen asked. I did, several. They asked for permission to look at the financial records, which I gave immediately. Within hours, they'd found the source of the $25,000 payment. Marcus had taken out a second mortgage on our house without telling me, forging my signature on the documents. He'd done it 3 months ago, gotten a loan for $75,000, and I'd had no idea. $50,000 had gone into a separate account I didn't know about, and $25,000 had been withdrawn in cash 2 weeks ago, presumably the down payment for my murder. But why did he need the money? That was the question that haunted me. If he wanted to kill me to collect insurance money or something, why would he need to take out a second mortgage first? Agent Rodriguez had a theory. A lot of times in cases like this, he explained, the person hiring the hitman is in desperate financial trouble. They're underwater on debts, maybe gambling debts or debts to dangerous people, and they see killing their spouse as a way out. Either they collect insurance money, or they get access to assets they couldn't touch while the spouse was alive, or they eliminate someone who was about to find out about the debts and leave them. It turned out Agent Rodriguez was exactly right. Over the next few days, the FBI uncovered Marcus's secret life. He'd been gambling heavily for at least 3 years. Online poker primarily, but also sports betting and even some cryptocurrency trading that was really just another form of gambling. He'd lost everything. Our savings, his retirement account, and he'd racked up over $200,000 in debt. Most of it was to online gambling sites, but about $70,000 was owed to a loan shark who'd been threatening him with violence if he didn't pay up soon. Marcus had been living this double life for years, pretending to go to work, pretending everything was fine, while secretly bleeding money through his gambling addiction. He'd managed to hide it from me because I'd trusted him to handle most of our finances. I paid my share of the bills and assumed he was taking care of everything else. I'd had no idea we were drowning in debt, no idea our house was being taken away from us, no idea that the man I slept next to every night was so desperate he'd decided killing me was his only way out. The FBI's theory was that Marcus planned to kill me, collect on my life insurance policy, which was worth $300,000, and use that money to pay off his debts and start over. It was a plan born of desperation and delusion, the kind of plan that only makes sense to someone who's already lost touch with reality through the fog of addiction. The FBI set up a sting operation. They wanted to catch both Marcus and the person he'd hired. They had me continue to stay in hiding while they used electronic surveillance to monitor all of Marcus's communications. They tracked down the email address from the encrypted service, worked with the company to identify the user, and eventually found him. His name was Derek Mills, a former military guy who'd turned to crime after being dishonorably discharged. He had a record of assault and extortion, but had never been caught for any murders, though the FBI suspected he'd been involved in at least 2 other murder-for-hire cases that hadn't been solved. The sting went down 2 weeks later. Derek had messaged Marcus, telling him he was ready to complete the project, and they arranged to meet in a parking lot to exchange the final payment. The FBI was waiting. They arrested both Marcus and Derek, along with confiscating computers, phones, and financial records that filled in the remaining gaps in the story. I watched Marcus's arrest on video later, footage from an FBI surveillance van. He looked so normal, just a guy in business casual clothes meeting someone in a parking lot. You'd never know you were watching someone hand over money to have his wife murdered. When the FBI agents identified themselves and moved in for the arrest, Marcus didn't run or fight. He just stood there, shoulders slumping, looking defeated, like he'd known all along that this was how it would end. The trial took almost a year. Marcus pled guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, mortgage fraud, and several other charges. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. Derek Mills got 30 years for his role in the murder-for-hire plot, and for previous crimes they were able to pin on him once they had access to his files. The FBI found evidence connecting him to 3 other murders he'd been paid to commit over the past decade. My case, ironically, was the one that finally brought him down because I'd found those emails before he could complete the job. I had to testify during the sentencing phase, telling the judge how finding out about the plot had affected me. I tried to put into words the feeling of knowing your husband wanted you dead, the paranoia, the sleepless nights, the way I jumped every time I heard an unexpected noise. The betrayal that went so deep it changed the fundamental way I understood the world and other people. The judge seemed to understand. He called Marcus's actions a profound betrayal of trust and an evil born of selfish desperation. Marcus wrote me a letter from prison a few months after his sentencing. It sat unopened on my kitchen counter for 2 weeks before I finally had the courage to read it. It was 5 pages long, handwritten in his familiar script. He apologized. He tried to explain. He said the gambling had taken over his life, that he'd been in such a dark place he couldn't see any other way out, that he'd never actually intended to go through with it and had been planning to call it off. That last part was a lie. The FBI had found messages between him and Derek from the day before I found the emails, confirming final details and discussing the best time to strike. Marcus was going to let it happen. He was going to let someone murder me, and then he would have played the grieving husband at my funeral. I never wrote back. There was nothing to say. That man wasn't my husband anymore, if he ever really had been. The person I'd married was a fiction, a role Marcus had played while hiding the truth of who he really was. I got a divorce. It was quick and uncontested since Marcus was in prison and had bigger problems than fighting over who got the toaster. I sold the house, which was underwater on the mortgages anyway, and moved across the country to start over somewhere new where nobody knew my story. It's been 3 years now. I'm still in therapy, working through the trauma and trust issues that come from this kind of betrayal. I've dated a little, though it's hard. Every time I start to feel close to someone, that voice in the back of my head whispers warnings. What are they hiding? What don't you know? Are you safe? I'm working on it. Some days are better than others. I've learned that healing isn't linear. It's more like waves. Sometimes you're doing fine, and then something small will remind you, and you're right back in that moment of sitting at Marcus's desk, reading that email, realizing that the person who promised to love and protect you had hired someone to end your life. The hardest part isn't even the fear, though that's bad enough. It's the questions that don't have answers. Did Marcus ever really love me, or was our entire relationship a performance? When did he decide I was expendable? Was there a specific moment when he looked at me and thought, I could have her killed, or was it a slow deterioration? Did he feel anything when he sent that first email to Derek, when he handed over the money, when he confirmed he wanted it to look like an accident? Was there any part of him, even a small part, that hesitated or felt guilty? I'll never know the answers to those questions. And maybe that's okay. Maybe I don't need to know. What I do know is that I survived. I found the truth before it was too late, and I'm here, alive, building a new life. That has to be enough. Sometimes I think about Derek too, the man who was supposed to kill me. He's sitting in a federal prison somewhere, probably for the rest of his life. I wonder if he thinks about the people he did kill, the ones who didn't get lucky like I did. I wonder if he feels remorse, or if it was all just business to him. Jobs completed for money with no emotional investment in the human cost. I'll never know that either, and I don't particularly want to. Some questions are better left alone. The whole experience taught me that you can never really know another person, not completely. We all have secret rooms in our hearts, where we hide our worst impulses, our darkest thoughts, the things we're ashamed of. Most people never unlock those rooms, never let those shadows out. But for some people, under the right circumstances, under enough pressure, those doors swing open, and what comes out is capable of anything. Marcus was one of those people, and I was married to him for 6 years without having any idea. That's a heavy story to start with, I know. Take a breath. Maybe get up and stretch, pet your dog or cat if you have one, drink some water. These stories get intense, and it's important to remember they're not your story. You're safe in your space, listening to someone read words on a screen while Minecraft blocks get placed in the background. You're okay. Let's move to our next story, which is different in tone but no less disturbing in its own way. This comes from someone who discovered that their entire relationship had been built on lies and manipulation, a different kind of murder, where what dies isn't your body but your sense of self. I'm 29 years old now, but this story starts when I was 23 and thought I'd met my soulmate. His name was Ethan, and when I think about him now, I can barely connect the person I loved with the person I eventually discovered he really was. They seem like two completely different people, and in a way, they were. Ethan and I met at a coffee shop where we both went to work remotely. I was doing freelance graphic design. He was supposedly working on a startup related to green energy technology. He was handsome in that slightly dishevelled intellectual way, always wearing flannel shirts and thick-framed glasses, constantly typing away on his laptop with an intensity that suggested important work was being done. I'd noticed him for weeks before we actually spoke. There was something magnetic about him, something that drew the eye. Our first conversation happened when the coffee shop's Wi-Fi went down and everyone collectively groaned. Ethan turned to me and made a joke about having to actually talk to people like we were living in some kind of dark ages. I laughed. He introduced himself. We ended up talking for 2 hours about everything and nothing. Our childhoods, our dreams, the books we were reading, the shows we were binge-watching. It felt easy and natural, like talking to someone I'd known for years rather than just met. Within a month, we were dating. Within 3 months, he'd moved into my apartment. It happened so fast that my friends expressed concern, but I brushed them off. When you know, right? That's what I told myself and anyone who questioned the speed of our relationship. Ethan was perfect, attentive, thoughtful, always knowing exactly what to say to make me feel special. He'd bring me coffee in bed, leave little notes around the apartment telling me how much he loved me, plan elaborate date nights that felt like scenes from romantic movies. But there were strange things, little details that didn't quite add up. Ethan never let me visit his startup's office, always making excuses about how it was in a temporary location and too chaotic for visitors. He didn't want to meet my friends at first, saying he was shy around new people and preferred quality time with just me. He had very few possessions when he moved in, which he explained by saying he was a minimalist who didn't believe in accumulating stuff. His phone was password protected, and he was weird about letting me see the screen. Not in a blatantly suspicious way, but enough that I noticed. I ignored all the red flags because I was in love, or what I thought was love at the time. Looking back, I can see it was more like being under a spell. Ethan had a way of making me feel like I was the center of his universe, like nothing else mattered except us. It was intoxicating. It also made me increasingly isolated from my friends and family, though at the time I didn't realize that was happening. I just thought we were so happy together that we didn't need other people as much. The first crack in the facade appeared about a year into our relationship. I was using Ethan's laptop to check my email, because mine had died and I accidentally opened his email instead of logging into my own. What I saw made no sense. The inbox was full of emails addressed to someone named James Walcott. There were job applications, bank statements, correspondence with people I'd never heard of, all addressed to this James person. I clicked around, confused, and found emails going back years, an entire life lived under a different name. When Ethan got home, I confronted him. I kept my tone light, assuming there had to be a reasonable explanation. "Hey, who's James Walcott? I saw some emails on your laptop." The change in Ethan was immediate and frightening. His whole face transformed, going from his usual warm expression to something cold and calculating. For just a second, I saw a stranger looking at me. Then he laughed it off, said James was his middle name that he used for business purposes because Ethan was too common and he wanted to stand out. It was a smooth lie, delivered with just the right amount of casual confidence. I wanted to believe him, so I did. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it started to grow. I began paying more attention to the little inconsistencies in Ethan's stories. He'd told me he grew up in Portland, but once he referenced going to a specific high school in Boston, and then quickly changed the subject when I asked about it. He said he didn't have social media because he thought it was toxic, but I'd caught glimpses of Facebook notifications on his phone. His startup, that was supposedly in stealth mode and about to get major funding, never seemed to materialize into anything concrete, and after 2 years, he was still doing prep work and building connections, but never actually launching anything. I started doing what I'm not proud of, but felt necessary. I snooped. When Ethan was in the shower, I'd grab his phone and try different passwords. It took me a week, but I finally got in. His passcode was his supposed birthday, which I realized later was probably fake too. What I found was worse than I could have imagined: multiple email accounts under multiple names, dating profiles on various apps where he listed himself as single, text conversations with women who he was clearly seeing while also living with me, telling them the same sweet things he told me, using the same lines he'd used to seduce me. But it went deeper than just cheating. I found evidence that Ethan, or whatever his real name was, had been running various cons for years. He'd borrowed money from women he was dating and never paid it back. He'd moved in with them, lived rent-free while claiming his startup was about to make him rich, then disappeared when they started asking too many questions. There were emails discussing identity theft, credit card fraud, elaborate stories he'd crafted to explain why he needed money, or why he couldn't meet someone's parents, or why he had to suddenly leave town. I felt like I was going to throw up right there on our bedroom floor. The man I loved, the man I'd built my life around for 2 years, was a con artist, a grifter, someone who made his living by manipulating vulnerable people, mostly women, and stealing from them. Everything about our relationship had been a lie. Every sweet word, every romantic gesture, every moment of supposed connection had been calculated manipulation, designed to keep me providing him with housing and money and emotional support while he ran his various scams. I did what anyone who's read too many true crime stories would do. I started documenting everything. I took photos of every suspicious email, every fake profile, every conversation with other women. I backed it all up to a cloud drive he didn't know about. I needed proof because I knew that when I confronted him, he'd lie. That's what he did. That's who he was. A professional liar who was so good at it he'd convinced me he was my soulmate. The confrontation happened on a Saturday morning. I'd printed out some of the most damning evidence and spread it across our coffee table. When Ethan woke up and came into the living room, he found me sitting there with it all laid out like a detective's murder board. I watched his face as he took in the scene. Again, that flash of someone else behind his eyes. Then the mask came back up, and he tried to explain. He was so good at it. I could feel myself wanting to believe him even though I knew better. He told me the other women meant nothing. They were from before he met me. Lie. Some of the conversations were from last week. He said the fake names were because he was in witness protection and couldn't reveal his real identity. Lie. I'd found his real name through some internet searching. Thomas Anders, with a criminal record including fraud and identity theft charges. He said he loved me and would explain everything if I just gave him a chance. That was probably the biggest lie of all. I told him to leave. just pack his things and get out of my apartment. He tried various tactics, tears, anger, bargaining, gaslighting, by suggesting I was paranoid and seeing things that weren't real. When none of that worked, he left. Just walked out with a duffel bag of clothes and disappeared from my life as quickly as he'd entered it. I later found out he'd stolen some of my jewellery and several $100s from my emergency cash stash before he went, one final theft for the road. The aftermath was brutal in a different way than the first story. Nobody tried to kill me physically, but the psychological damage was immense. Ethan, or Thomas, or whatever his name was, had spent 2 years systematically destroying my ability to trust my own judgment. Every memory I had of our time together was poisoned now, recontextualized as manipulation rather than love. The sweet notes were just part of the con. The elaborate dates were investments in keeping me hooked. The intense connection I'd felt was a skillfully crafted illusion, a mirror he'd held up that reflected back what I wanted to see. I went into a deep depression. I stopped working, stopped seeing the friends I had left, spent days just lying in bed trying to understand how I'd been so stupid. Therapy helped, eventually. My therapist specialized in helping people recover from relationships with narcissists and sociopaths. She explained that people like Thomas are essentially predators who've learned to identify and exploit emotional vulnerabilities. He'd seen that I was lonely, looking for connection, and he'd become exactly what I needed. It wasn't my fault for falling for it. It was his fault for being the kind of person who would do that to another human being. I learned that Thomas had a long history of this behaviour. I found online communities of other women he'd conned, some going back almost 10 years. Same pattern every time. Sweep them off their feet, move in quickly, live off them while running various scams, disappear when caught or when the money ran out. For some women, he'd gotten them to take out loans or max out credit cards before he left, leaving them in financial ruin. I'd gotten off easy, relatively speaking. He'd only gotten a few months of rent and some stolen jewellery from me, but the emotional cost was enormous. It's been 6 years since Thomas left, and I'm still dealing with the aftermath. I'm in a healthy relationship now with a wonderful man who's been patient with my trust issues and trauma responses. But there are moments when I look at him and that voice whispers, what if he's lying too? What if this is all another con? It's not fair to him and I know it's not rational, but trauma doesn't care about fairness or rationality. The hardest part was accepting that I'll never fully understand why Thomas did what he did. Was it just about money? Did he get some psychological satisfaction from manipulating people? Did he feel anything at all for me, or was I just another mark in a long line of victims? I'll never know because people like that don't explain themselves honestly. They don't have that capacity for genuine self-reflection and honesty. What I do know is that there are more people like Thomas out there than we want to believe. Charming predators who've learned to mimic human connection well enough to fool even smart, cautious people. They're in the dating pool, they're on the apps, they're at the coffee shops and the bars and everywhere people meet. And there's no foolproof way to identify them before they've hurt you because they're so good at being exactly what you need them to be. That's terrifying to think about, but it's also empowering in a strange way. Knowing that I survived, that I figured out the truth before he could do even more damage, that I'm here and building a real life with real connections based on real honesty that matters. Thomas took 2 years from me. He doesn't get to take the rest of my life. Let me take a breath here and shift gears a bit. These first 2 stories are heavy, dealing with attempted murder and elaborate deception. They're the kind of stories that make you think about how well you really know the people in your life, how much darkness can hide behind familiar faces. But they're also stories about survival, about people who discovered terrible truths and managed to escape before it was too late. Our next story is different in some ways, but similar in others. It's about family betrayal, which in some ways cuts even deeper than romantic betrayal because family is supposed to be your foundation, your safe place. When that foundation cracks, everything built on top of it becomes unstable. This story comes from someone who discovered that their brother, the person they'd grown up with and trusted implicitly, had been systematically stealing their identity for years. Not just stealing money, though there was that too, but stealing their entire sense of self, their opportunities, their future. I'm 32 years old, and my brother Tyler is 35. We grew up in a middle-class family in the suburbs of Chicago, Had a pretty normal childhood as far as I could tell. Tyler was always the golden child, the one who excelled at sports and got good grades without seeming to try, while I was more average, quietly doing okay, but never standing out. Our parents loved us both, or so I thought, but there was definitely a sense that Tyler was special, and I was just, there. After high school, I went to community college, while Tyler got a scholarship to a good state university. I worked retail jobs to pay my tuition, eventually got an associate's degree in business, and settled into a decent career doing accounting for a mid-sized manufacturing company. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I was good at it. Tyler, meanwhile, seemed to struggle more than expected. He dropped out of university after 2 years, came back home, and went through a series of jobs that never quite worked out. Our parents were disappointed, but still supportive, always making excuses for why things hadn't gone Tyler's way. The first sign something was wrong came when I was 26. I'd applied for a car loan and got rejected, which was confusing because I had good credit, or thought I did. When I pulled my credit report, I found several credit cards I'd never opened, all maxed out, and a personal loan for $15,000 that I definitely hadn't taken out. The addresses on these accounts were mostly my parents' house, where I'd lived until I was 22, but some were at apartments I'd never lived in. I reported it as identity theft, went through the whole nightmare process of proving I hadn't opened these accounts, filing police reports, freezing my credit. It took months to sort out. The police couldn't figure out who'd done it. The addresses were mostly places I'd had some connection to, which made it seem like it might be someone I knew, but there was no clear evidence pointing to anyone specific. I chalked it up to some stranger who'd somehow gotten my information, maybe from a data breach or stolen mail. 2 years later, it happened again. More credit cards, another loan, even an apartment lease in my name that I didn't know about until I got served with an eviction notice for unpaid rent. This time, I was more proactive. I filed police reports immediately, contacted the credit bureaus, put fraud alerts on everything. But I also started investigating on my own because this felt too targeted, too personal to be random identity theft. I hired a private investigator, a retired cop named Dennis, who specialized in fraud cases. I gave him all the information I had, the addresses where accounts had been opened, the dates, the spending patterns on the fraudulent credit cards. Dennis worked his magic, and within a month he had an answer I didn't want to hear. The person using my identity was my brother Tyler. Dennis had surveillance photos of Tyler using a fake ID with my name on it to open a bank account. He had credit card statements showing charges at stores near Tyler's apartment. He had tracked down the landlord of the apartment that had been leased in my name and gotten security footage showing Tyler moving in. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My brother, the person I'd shared a childhood with, had been destroying my financial life for years. And it wasn't just about the money. Tyler had used my identity to rent apartments he then trashed, leading to eviction judgments against me. He'd applied for jobs using my name and social security number, then not shown up or performed so poorly that I had employment black marks I didn't even know about. He'd even tried to file taxes under my name one year to steal my refund. The confrontation with Tyler was surreal. I brought the evidence to his apartment, along with Dennis, because I didn't trust what Tyler might do when cornered. Tyler tried to deny it at first, but when faced with the photos and documents, he broke down, not with remorse, but with rage. He started screaming about how everything had always been easy for me, how I'd never had to struggle, how it wasn't fair that I got to have a good job and good credit while he was barely scraping by. I stood there listening to this tirade and realized Tyler had created an entire fictional narrative where I was the privileged one and he was the victim. Never mind that I'd worked full-time while going to community college. Never mind that I'd built my career through years of steady work while he'd bounced from job to job. Never mind that every advantage he'd ever had, he'd squandered through laziness or a sense of entitlement. In Tyler's mind, I owed him this. He deserved to use my identity because somehow I'd stolen the life that should have been his. I pressed charges. Our parents begged me not to, said it would destroy the family, said Tyler needed help, not jail. I told them that Tyler had destroyed my credit, my reputation, my sense of security. He'd stolen thousands of dollars from me, ruined my financial future, and shown absolutely no remorse beyond anger that he'd been caught. He needed to face consequences. The legal process was long and painful. Tyler got a public defender who tried to argue that this was a family matter that should be handled privately, not through the criminal justice system. The prosecutor didn't buy it. Identity theft is a serious crime, especially when it's systematic and repeated over years. Tyler eventually pled guilty to multiple counts of identity theft and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence of 3 years in prison. Our parents blamed me. That was almost worse than what Tyler had done. They said I'd destroyed the family, that I was cruel and vindictive, that I should have found a way to handle it privately. They'd always enabled Tyler, always made excuses for him, and even facing his crimes, they couldn't accept that he was responsible for his own choices. They cut me off. I haven't spoken to them in 4 years. Tyler got out of prison 6 months ago. I know because he tried to contact me through social media, sending messages that alternated between apologies and accusations. He said he was sorry, but that I'd overreacted by involving the police. He said he'd paid his debt to society and I should forgive him. He said the 3 years in prison had been harder than anything I'd been through, as if getting your identity stolen and credit destroyed was just a minor inconvenience. I blocked him on everything. I have restraining orders and my credit is still frozen solid. I check my credit reports obsessively, always waiting for the next shoe to drop, the next fraudulent account to appear. My therapist says I'm showing signs of hypervigilance, that Tyler's actions gave me a form of PTSD. She's probably right. I jump every time I get unexpected mail. I panic when credit card companies call. I've sabotaged relationships because I couldn't trust people enough to let them get close. The betrayal of family cuts different than other betrayals. Your partner, you chose them. Your friends, you chose them. But your family, especially your siblings, they're just there. You don't choose them, but you're supposed to be able to trust them anyway. Finding out Tyler had been destroying my life while still showing up to family dinners and acting like a normal brother, that shattered something fundamental in how I understand relationships. I think about him sometimes, wonder if he actually feels remorseful now, or if he's just sorry he got caught. Wonder if prison changed him, or just made him better at hiding his true nature. Wonder if he tells himself he's the victim in all this, betrayed by a sibling who didn't help him when he was struggling. I'll never know. We'll never have a relationship again. He made sure of that when he decided my identity was his, to steal. The saddest part is losing my parents too. They chose Tyler, chose to enable his criminal behaviour rather than hold him accountable. In their minds, family means protecting each other even when one of you is actively harming the other. That's not family. That's just shared DNA and a toxic sense of loyalty that prioritizes the wrong person. Real family would have supported me, validated my pain, insisted Tyler face consequences for his actions. But I didn't have real family, apparently. I just had people who shared my last name and thought that meant I owed them infinite forgiveness for infinite betrayals. I'm building my own family now. Found family, made up of friends who've proven their loyalty and trustworthiness over years. It's smaller than what I had before, more carefully curated, but it's real. These people see me, care about me, would never think to steal from me or betray my trust. That's worth more than any biological connection that comes with conditions and expectations that I somehow deserved what Tyler did to me. Let's take another pause here. I know these stories are intense. They're meant to be. Sometimes we need to hear about other people's worst moments to feel grateful for our own lives, or to feel less alone if we've been through similar betrayals. There's something cathartic about knowing you're not the only one who's been hurt, who's been lied to, who's had someone they trusted reveal themselves to be a monster. Our next story is going to touch on domestic abuse, so if that's a trigger for you, this might be a good time to take a break. Get some water, step outside for a minute, pet your cat. Come back when you're ready, or skip ahead if you need to. Your mental health matters more than hearing every story. For those still here, this story comes from someone who escaped an abusive relationship where the abuse wasn't physical, at least not mostly, but psychological and emotional. The kind of abuse that doesn't leave visible scars but that destroys you from the inside out. I'm 37 years old now, but the story I'm going to tell takes place over 5 years, from when I was 28 to 33. Those 5 years feel like a lifetime, like they happened to a different person, which in a way they did. The person I am now barely recognizes the person I was then, the person who stayed in a relationship that was killing her spirit bit by bit. His name was Connor, and when we met, I was working as a middle school teacher and trying to establish my career. Connor was a pharmaceutical sales rep, charming and confident, always sharply dressed and quick with a compliment. He pursued me aggressively, showing up at my school with coffee, sending flowers to my classroom, planning elaborate dates. It felt romantic at the time. Looking back, I can see it was the beginning of him establishing control, showing me that he was willing to do anything to be with me, which translated in my naive mind to deep love rather than obsessive possessiveness. The early days were good, or seemed good. Connor was attentive and affectionate, always wanting to spend time together, always interested in every detail of my day. He'd text me constantly throughout the day, just to say he was thinking about me. He wanted to meet my friends and family, wanted to be integrated into every part of my life. I thought it was sweet. I didn't realize it was reconnaissance, him learning about all the people and things that mattered to me so he could later use them against me. The first incident happened about 4 months in. We were at dinner with some of my friends from work, other teachers I'd known for years. One of them, a guy named Jake who taught history, made a joke that made me laugh. It was innocent, just Jake being his usual goofy self. But Connor went quiet. On the drive home, he asked why I'd laughed so hard at Jake's joke. Was I attracted to Jake? Did I have a history with him? I assured him that Jake was just a friend, that I'd never thought of him romantically. Connor seemed to accept this, but the seed had been planted. Over the next few months, Connor became increasingly paranoid about my male friends and colleagues. He'd question me about every interaction, every text message, every time I mentioned a man's name in passing. He started accusing me of flirting, of wanting to cheat, of secretly harbouring feelings for other men. It was exhausting and confusing because I'd never given him any reason to doubt my faithfulness. I started avoiding mentioning male co-workers altogether, started making excuses to not hang out with male friends, anything to avoid the interrogations that would follow. But cutting off male friends wasn't enough. Connor started finding problems with my female friends too. This one was a bad influence because she drank too much. That one was clearly jealous of our relationship and trying to sabotage it. Another one was too flirty with men and was going to drag me into situations where I might be tempted to cheat. One by one, my friendships eroded because it was easier to let them go than to deal with Connor's reactions every time I saw someone. My family became a problem too. Connor thought my mother was manipulative and controlling, constantly trying to interfere in our relationship. He thought my sister was judgmental and didn't respect him. He'd pick fights after every family gathering, analysing every comment anyone made and finding hidden insults and disrespect. Eventually, I started skipping family events because the aftermath wasn't worth it. My family tried to reach out, tried to express concern, but Connor had isolated me so effectively that their concerns just seemed like the interference he'd warned me about. The psychological abuse escalated slowly enough that I didn't notice the pattern. Connor had a way of twisting every argument so that I ended up apologising, even when he was clearly in the wrong. He'd give me the silent treatment for days if I did something that displeased him, and I'd spend that time desperately trying to figure out what I'd done and how to fix it. He'd criticise my appearance in ways that seemed concerned rather than mean, suggesting I'd look better if I lost weight or dressed differently or wore my hair a certain way. Slowly, my self-esteem crumbled until I couldn't remember what it felt like to be confident. Connor controlled our finances, even though we weren't married and kept separate apartments. He convinced me to give him access to my bank account so he could help me budget better, since apparently I was terrible with money. He'd question every purchase, making me justify spending my own money on things like lunch with co-workers or new clothes for work. He opened credit cards in both our names, supposedly for shared expenses, then maxed them out and expected me to help pay them off. I felt trapped by debt and obligation. The few times I tried to break up with him, Connor would either have a breakdown, threatening to hurt himself if I left, or he'd become the perfect boyfriend again for a few weeks, showering me with love and promises to change. The cycle was dizzying. Whenever I built up enough courage to leave, he'd pull me back in by becoming the man I'd first fallen in love with, that charming, attentive person who made me feel special. It would last just long enough for me to doubt my decision to leave, then slowly the criticism and control would creep back in. My teaching suffered. I used to love my job, love working with kids, but under Connor's influence I became withdrawn and anxious. I couldn't focus in class because I was always worried about whether I'd texted Connor back quickly enough, or whether he'd find something to be angry about when I got home. My principal pulled me aside and asked if everything was okay. I lied and said I was fine, just stressed. She didn't push, but I could see the concern in her eyes. The turning point came during a particularly bad fight. Connor had gone through my phone while I was asleep and found a text chain with my sister where I'd vented a little about relationship stress. Nothing dramatic, just saying I was feeling overwhelmed. He woke me up at 3 a.m, screaming about how I'd betrayed him by complaining about our relationship to my family, how I'd made him look bad. How dare I discuss our private business with anyone else? I was disoriented from being woken up, scared by his rage, trying to apologize and calm him down. Connor grabbed my phone and threw it against the wall, shattering it. Then he started going through my apartment, looking for anything else I might be hiding from him. He found my journal, where I'd been writing about how unhappy I was, how trapped I felt. He read passages aloud in a mocking voice, then ripped pages out and threw them around my bedroom. I stood there in shock, finally seeing him clearly for the first time. This wasn't love. This wasn't even a relationship. This was abuse, and I was the victim. Something broke in me that night, or maybe something healed. The spell was broken. I could see Connor for what he was, a controlling, manipulative abuser who'd systematically isolated me from everyone who cared about me, destroyed my self-esteem, and was slowly destroying my entire life. When he finally stormed out, I didn't follow. I didn't call him. I didn't apologize. I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by torn journal pages, and just breathed. The next morning, I called my sister. I told her everything, broke down crying, admitted that she'd been right to worry about Connor. She immediately came over, helped me pack a bag, and took me to my parents' house. I stayed there for 2 weeks while I figured out my next steps. During that time, Connor called and texted constantly, cycling through rage, apologies, threats, and love declarations. I didn't respond to any of it. With my family's support, I got a restraining order against Connor. I documented every abusive text and email, provided testimony about the psychological abuse and the financial control. The judge granted the order without hesitation. I changed my phone number, changed the locks on my apartment, blocked Connor on every possible platform. I started therapy with a counsellor who specialised in domestic abuse recovery. Connor violated the restraining order twice, showing up at my apartment and my school. Both times, I called the police. Both times, he was arrested. The second violation got him 30 days in jail, which finally seemed to make him understand that I was serious. After he got out, he moved to a different state. I haven't heard from him in 4 years. Recovery has been a long process. Therapy helped me understand that what I'd experienced was domestic abuse, even though Connor rarely hit me. There was one time he'd grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises, and another time he'd pushed me into a wall, but mostly his abuse was psychological. The gaslighting, the isolation, the financial control, the constant criticism disguised as concern, it all counts. It all causes damage. I had to rebuild my entire life, reconnect with friends and family I'd pushed away, relearn how to trust my own judgment after years of being told I was wrong about everything, establish financial independence after Connor had tangled our finances together, figure out who I was outside of his control and manipulation. It was hard work, harder than I'd expected, but slowly I started to feel like myself again. I'm in a healthy relationship now with a man named David who is patient and kind and respects my boundaries. Sometimes I still flinch when he moves quickly or raises his voice, even just to be heard over background noise. Sometimes I still ask permission to spend money on myself or apologize for things that aren't my fault. David is gentle when these trauma responses come up, reminds me that I'm safe, that he's not Connor. Therapy helps, time helps. But I don't think I'll ever fully get over those 5 years of my life that Connor stole from me. The most dangerous thing about psychological abuse is how invisible it is. There are no bruises for people to see and question. The scars are all internal. And the abuser is often charming and likable to everyone except their victim, so when you try to explain what's happening, people don't believe you. They think you're exaggerating or being dramatic. Connor was beloved by his co-workers and family. He volunteered at animal shelters and coached youth soccer. To the outside world, he was a great guy. Only I saw the monster he was behind closed doors. I think about all the other women who might be in relationships, like the one I escaped. Women who are being slowly destroyed by psychological abuse but don't recognize it because their abuser has convinced them that they're the problem, that they're too sensitive or dramatic or crazy. Women who are isolated from their support systems and drowning in self-doubt. I want them to know that it's not their fault, that abuse doesn't have to leave visible marks to be real, that they deserve better, that escape is possible, even when it seems impossible. Connor tried to break me. He spent 5 years systematically dismantling my sense of self. But I survived. I got out. I rebuilt. And I'm happier now than I ever was with him, even in the early days when everything seemed perfect. Because this happiness is real. It's based on healthy relationships and genuine self-worth, not on walking on eggshells and performing for someone who sees me as an object to control rather than a person to love. That story always makes me think about how abuse wears so many different faces. We have this cultural image of an abuser as someone who hits, but that's such a narrow view of how people can harm the ones they claim to love. Emotional abuse, financial abuse, psychological manipulation, these are all forms of domestic violence and they're all devastating. The fact that they don't leave physical scars doesn't make them less serious. Let's shift gears again. Our next story is shorter, but no less impactful. It's about a single moment of betrayal that revealed years of lies, the kind of revelation that makes you question your entire understanding of your own history. This comes from someone who discovered, quite by accident, that the man who raised them wasn't their biological father, and worse, that everyone in their family had known the truth except them. I'm 41 years old, and up until last year, I thought I knew who I was and where I came from. I grew up in a small town in Pennsylvania, raised by my parents Robert and Linda, along with my younger sister Emma. We were a normal family, or so I thought. Dad worked at the local hardware store. Mum was a nurse at the county hospital. We had dinner together most nights, went on camping trips in the summer, celebrated holidays with extended family. There was nothing remarkable about my childhood except how unremarkable it was. The truth came out because of a DNA test. One of those ancestry kits that everyone was doing, trying to find distant relatives and learn about their ethnic background. I'd bought it on a whim during a holiday sale, spit in the tube, sent it off, and forgot about it for a few months until the results came back. The ethnicity breakdown was about what I expected, mostly British and Irish with some German thrown in, matching what I'd always been told about my family heritage. But the DNA matches were confusing. The test had connected me with several people who were listed as close relatives, second cousins and third cousins mostly. But when I looked at their family trees, none of the names were familiar. I couldn't figure out how I was related to these people. There was no overlap between their ancestors and mine. I spent hours going through family trees, trying to find the connection, becoming increasingly frustrated. Then I got a message through the DNA site from a woman named Carol, who was listed as a first cousin, meaning we shared a set of grandparents. Carol's message was friendly, saying she was excited to find a new cousin and asking how we were related. I looked at her family tree and felt my stomach drop. Her father was a man named Michael Stanton, who'd lived in the same small town I'd grown up in. He died 5 years ago. I'd never heard of him, never knew anyone in my family was connected to the Stantons. I messaged Carol back, trying to play it cool while my brain was spinning. I asked her what she knew about our connection. She seemed confused, said she'd assumed I was related through her father, Michael, since the DNA said we were first cousins. She asked who my father was. I told her Robert, and she said she'd never heard that name. We were both confused, but the math was simple and devastating. If Carol and I were first cousins, we shared a set of grandparents, but our grandparents were different people according to our family trees, which meant one of our fathers wasn't who we thought he was. I didn't want to believe what the evidence was suggesting. I told Carol I needed to do some research and would get back to her. Then I called my mum. She was at work. I remember because I could hear the background noise of the hospital. "Mum," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Is Dad my biological father?" The silence on the other end of the line lasted forever. Finally, my mum said in a quiet voice, "Where is this coming from?" I told her about the DNA test, about Carol, about the family trees that didn't match up. Another long silence. Then, "Can we talk about this when I get home? This isn't a conversation for the phone." I knew then that my entire life had been a lie. Mum came home early, which she never did. Dad was already there, sitting at the kitchen table looking like someone had died. In a way, someone had. The version of me that thought he knew who he was. They sat me down and Mum started talking. It turned out that Linda and Robert had been having problems early in their marriage. They'd separated for a few months, though they'd kept it quiet and didn't tell anyone outside immediate family. During that separation, Linda had a brief relationship with Michael Stanton. When Linda and Robert got back together, she was pregnant. She wasn't sure who the father was. They made the decision together to assume it was Robert's and to never speak of it again. "We decided it didn't matter," Mum said, tears running down her face. "Robert was your father in every way that counted. He raised you, loved you, was there for every moment of your life. The biology didn't matter to us, but it mattered to me. It mattered that I'd gone 40 years not knowing the truth about who I was. It mattered that my entire family, because of course extended family knew too, had kept this secret from me my whole life. It mattered that my biological father had lived in the same small town, that I'd probably passed him on the street dozens of times, that he'd died without me ever knowing he was my father." Dad, Robert, was crying too. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry. We thought we were protecting you. We thought it was better if you never knew." I wanted to scream at them that it wasn't their decision to make, that I had a right to know where I came from, who I was, but I couldn't get the words out. I just sat there feeling like the ground had disappeared beneath me. The next few days were a blur. I reached out to Carol again, explained the situation. She was shocked but kind, said she'd wondered about having a cousin she'd never heard of but hadn't wanted to pry. She told me about Michael, my biological father, the man whose DNA I carried but whom I'd never met. He'd been a mechanic, married with 3 kids, including Carol. He'd been a quiet man who loved fishing and old Western movies. He died of a heart attack at 67, 5 years before I found out he was my father. I had 3 half-siblings I'd never known about. Carol and her 2 brothers. They lived within an hour of me, had been that close all these years. Carol arranged a meeting with her brothers, Mark and David. It was awkward and emotional. They knew about me, it turned out. Michael had told them years ago that he'd had a brief relationship with Linda, and there was a chance they had a half-sibling out there, but that the child was being raised by Linda's husband and it was complicated. They'd never tried to reach out because they'd been respecting their father's wish to let sleeping dogs lie. I felt betrayed by everyone. My parents for lying to me for 40 years, my extended family for keeping the secret, Michael Stanton for never trying to reach out, never giving me the choice to know him. Even my new half-siblings felt like a betrayal somehow, representing a whole side of my family I'd been denied access to. I was angry and hurt and confused all at once. My relationship with my parents has been strained since the revelation. I know Robert, Dad. He's still my dad in all the ways that matter, loves me and did his best to raise me right. I know they made the decision to keep this secret because they thought it was best, but they didn't give me agency in my own story. They decided for me that I didn't need to know where half my DNA came from, didn't need to have a relationship with my biological father or my half-siblings. They chose to let Michael Stanton die without me ever knowing he was my father, taking away any chance I had to make my own decision about whether to connect with him. I've been getting to know Carol, Mark, and David. They're good people, and it's strange discovering similarities I share with them, mannerisms and traits that make sense now that I know we're related. But there's also a sadness to it because I can't get back the 40 years we could have known each other. I can't get back the chance to know Michael, to decide for myself what kind of relationship I wanted with my biological father. The DNA test opened a door I can't close. I know things now that I can't unknow. My identity has shifted in ways I'm still processing. I look in the mirror and wonder which features came from Michael instead of Robert. I think about hereditary health conditions I should have known about, but didn't, because I didn't know half my genetic history. I wonder what else my family has lied about. What other secrets might be lurking. It's been over a year, and I'm still angry. My therapist says that's normal, that finding out this kind of fundamental truth about yourself at 40 years old is traumatic. She says it's okay to be angry at my parents while also loving them. She says it's okay to grieve for the father I never got to meet and the relationships I was denied. She says it will get easier with time, that I'll find a way to integrate this new understanding of myself with the person I've always been. I hope she's right. Some days I feel okay, like I can handle this revelation and move forward. Other days I feel like I'm drowning in questions without answers. Who would I have been if I'd known the truth from the beginning? Would I have wanted a relationship with Michael Stanton? Would knowing my biological father have changed how I understood myself? I'll never know the answers to those questions because my parents made that choice for me. And that's the part I'm still struggling to forgive. That's such a painful story, isn't it? The violation of finding out that everyone around you knew a fundamental truth about your identity that was kept from you. It's not quite betrayal in the same way as the other stories we've covered, but it's a betrayal of trust nonetheless. The decision to keep secrets that affect someone's understanding of themselves, even with good intentions, can be just as damaging as more obvious forms of deception. We're going to take one more story tonight, and this one's going to bring us back to where we started, in a way. It's another story about discovering that someone close to you was planning something terrible, but this time with a slightly different twist. This story involves a best friend, someone who'd been part of this person's life since childhood, and the devastating revelation of how deep betrayal can run even in the most trusted relationships. I'm 28 years old, and until 2 years ago, my best friend was a guy named Jason, who I'd known since we were 7. We'd grown up on the same street, gone to the same schools, been inseparable through childhood and into adulthood. He was the brother I'd never had, the person who knew all my secrets, who'd been there for every major moment of my life. When people talked about friendship goals, about ride-or-die loyalty, I thought of Jason. I would have trusted him with my life, and that trust almost got me killed. Jason and I had both stayed in our hometown after high school, which was unusual for our friend group. Most people couldn't wait to leave our small Colorado mountain town for bigger cities and better opportunities. But Jason and I loved it here, loved the skiing and hiking and the tight-knit community feel. I worked as a paramedic, Jason worked construction. We'd grab beers after work, went on camping trips together, spent holidays with each other's families. Our lives were deeply intertwined in that way long friendships can be. About 3 years ago, Jason started dating a woman named Melissa. She was new to town, had moved here for a fresh start after a bad divorce. She seemed nice enough at first, friendly and outgoing, though there was something about her that I couldn't quite put my finger on, something that felt off. I mentioned it to Jason once, tried to be diplomatic about it, said I thought maybe she was moving too fast with talking about marriage and moving in together after just a few months of dating. Jason got defensive, said I was being jealous because he was spending less time with me. I backed off because I didn't want to damage our friendship over my vague concerns about his girlfriend. Jason and Melissa got engaged after 6 months together. The wedding was planned for a year later. I was supposed to be Jason's best man, of course. But as the wedding approached, Jason started acting strange. He was more distant, harder to get hold of. He'd cancel plans at the last minute, always with excuses about wedding planning or helping Melissa with something. When we did hang out, he seemed distracted and stressed, not like himself. I chalked it up to wedding jitters and the stress of planning. But then weird things started happening. My car was keyed in a parking lot. My apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen. Just things moved around like someone had been going through my stuff. I started getting hang-up calls at strange hours. None of it was dramatically threatening, but together it created this sense of unease, like someone was messing with me, but I couldn't figure out who or why. Then came the night that changed everything. I was working a late shift as a paramedic, got called out to a remote area for what was reported as a hiking accident. When we got there, It was a confusing scene. A man was lying at the bottom of a small cliff, clearly injured, but something felt wrong about the whole setup. The location was odd, not on any popular hiking trail. The person who'd called it in had left before we arrived, which was unusual. The victim himself, once we got him stabilized enough to talk, kept saying it wasn't an accident, that someone had pushed him. We got the guy to the hospital, and I was writing up my report when the police arrived to interview me. Apparently the victim had given them my name, said he knew who was responsible for his fall, and that it was connected to me. I was confused and more than a little concerned. I'd never seen this guy before in my life. Why was he mentioning my name? Turns out the victim was a private investigator named Tom Patterson, and the story he told the police, and then told me, was absolutely insane. Tom had been hired by Melissa's ex-husband, who was suspicious about why Melissa had suddenly filed for divorce and moved to Colorado. The ex had hired Tom to investigate, and Tom had discovered that Melissa had a history of targeting men with money, marrying them quickly, then arranging accidents that allowed her to collect life insurance payouts. The ex-husband had discovered some suspicious communications on her computer before she left, messages to someone she was planning her next con with. He'd been trying to warn Melissa's new victim, Jason, but hadn't been able to make contact before they got engaged. Tom had come to Colorado to investigate and had found evidence that Melissa and Jason were planning something together, not targeting Jason himself, but targeting me. They'd taken out a large life insurance policy on Jason with me as a secondary beneficiary in a strange twist, and had been setting up a situation where my death would look like an accident. Tom had confronted Jason that day, tried to warn him that he knew what was happening and was going to the police. Jason and Melissa had panicked. Jason had pushed Tom off the cliff, trying to silence him. It was just luck that Tom had survived the fall and been able to tell his story. I sat there in the hospital corridor listening to this and feeling like I was in some kind of bizarre movie. It made no sense. Jason was my best friend. Why would he want to hurt me? The police explained that they'd been looking into Jason's finances and had found that he was deeply in debt from gambling, over $300,000 owed to various bookies and loan sharks. Melissa had apparently targeted him because she'd identified him as vulnerable and desperate. Together, they'd hatched a plan to kill me and collect on an insurance policy Jason had taken out on me months ago without my knowledge, using forged documents. The betrayal was incomprehensible. Jason, who I'd trusted completely, who'd been like a brother to me for 20 years, had spent months planning my death. All those weird incidents, the keyed car, the break-in, had been them setting up a pattern that would make my eventual accident seem less suspicious. They'd been planning to make it look like I'd been targeted by some unknown stalker who finally succeeded in killing me. Jason would play the grieving best friend, collect the insurance money, pay off his debts, and presumably continue his relationship with Melissa as if nothing had happened. The police arrested Jason and Melissa. Tom's testimony, combined with forensic evidence from the cliff and the paper trail of the insurance fraud, was enough to charge them both with attempted murder and conspiracy to commit murder. When police searched Jason's house, they found detailed plans for my death, including schedules of my work shifts, notes about my habits and routines, and drafts of the story Jason planned to tell after I was dead. The trial was surreal. Having to sit in a courtroom and listen to prosecutors lay out how my best friend of 20 years had methodically planned to murder me for insurance money. Having to testify about our friendship, about how much I trusted him, while he sat there refusing to look at me. Melissa turned on Jason during the trial, trying to get a reduced sentence by testifying that it had all been his idea and she'd just gone along with it. Jason's lawyer tried to argue he'd been manipulated by Melissa, that she was the real mastermind. In the end, they both got convicted. Jason got 35 years, Melissa got 40. The aftermath has been the hardest part. Everyone in our small town knew about Jason and me, knew how close we'd been. The betrayal became public knowledge, and people looked at me with pity that made me want to scream. I lost more than just my best friend that day. I lost 20 years of memories that were now tainted by the knowledge that they'd all been leading up to this. Every good time we'd had, every secret we'd shared, every moment of trust and brotherhood, it was all meaningless now because he'd been willing to throw it all away to solve his financial problems, by ending my life. I had to move away from that town. I couldn't walk down the street without seeing places Jason and I had hung out, couldn't go to the bar where we'd watched countless games together, couldn't even stay in my own apartment because that's where we'd spent so many nights playing video games and just hanging out. Every memory had become poisoned, so I left, moved to a different state, got a new paramedic job, started over in a place where nobody knew my history. It's been 2 years, and I still have nightmares about it. Not just about almost being killed, though those are bad enough, but about the betrayal itself. In my dreams, I'm back in high school with Jason, and we're laughing about something stupid, and I want to warn my younger self. I want to tell him not to trust Jason, that this friendship will end with Jason trying to murder him for money, but of course, I can't. Dream me just watches younger me trusting someone who will eventually betray him in the worst possible way. I don't trust easily anymore. I've been in therapy for the past 2 years, working through the trauma and the trust issues. My therapist keeps telling me that what Jason did says everything about who he is and nothing about who I am. That I'm not stupid or naive for trusting a friend I'd had for 20 years. That most people would have trusted someone in that position. But it doesn't always feel that way. Sometimes I feel like I should have seen it coming. Should have noticed the signs of Jason's gambling problem or Melissa's manipulation, or the desperation that would lead someone to plan their best friend's murder. The worst part is the loss of innocence about friendship itself. I used to believe that true friendship was sacred, that the bonds formed over years of shared experiences were unbreakable. Now I know that's not true. Now I know that anyone, even the people you trust most, can betray you if the circumstances are right and they're desperate enough. That's a lonely way to see the world. It makes it hard to let people in, hard to build new friendships when you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop. I sometimes wonder about Jason, whether he thinks about what he did, whether he has regrets beyond getting caught. Does he think about our friendship and feel any loss, or is it just anger that his plan didn't work? I'll never know because I'll never speak to him again. There's nothing he could say that would make this okay, no apology that would mean anything after he tried to have me killed. The person I was before all this happened, the person who trusted easily and believed in the fundamental goodness of people I loved, that person is gone. I'm someone different now, harder and more cautious, always watching for warning signs of betrayal. I hate that Jason took that innocence from me, along with everything else. But I'm alive, which is more than I would have been if Tom Patterson hadn't survived that fall and told the truth. So I try to focus on that. I survived. I get to build a new life. That has to be enough. And that's where we're going to end tonight's collection of stories. These tales of betrayal and survival, of discovering terrible truths and somehow finding a way to keep going. They're heavy, I know. They're meant to be. Real life doesn't always have happy endings. Sometimes the people we trust most turn out to be strangers wearing familiar faces. Sometimes the life we think we're living is just a fiction maintained by other people's lies. But there's something important in these stories too. Every single person who shared their experience survived. They lived through betrayals that would break most people. They found the strength to leave, to press charges, to start over, to rebuild their sense of self from the ground up. That's not nothing. That's actually extraordinary. Because it would be so easy to let these kinds of betrayals destroy you completely. To never trust again. To never open yourself up to another person. To never risk being vulnerable. But these people did the harder thing. They survived and kept going. If you're going through something similar, if you've experienced betrayal or abuse or discovered that someone you trusted was lying to you, please know that you're not alone. Your feelings are valid. Your pain is real. And there is a path forward, even when you can't see it yet. It involves therapy, probably. It involves time, definitely. It involves being patient with yourself as you heal and rebuild. But it's possible. All these stories prove it's possible. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, listening to these difficult stories. I hope they've given you something to think about, or maybe just distracted you from your own problems for a while. Whatever brought you here, I'm glad you stayed. Take care of yourself. Be kind to yourself. And remember that even in the darkest moments, when the people we love most prove capable of terrible things, there's still goodness in the world. There are still people worth trusting, love worth risking everything for, hope worth holding on to. Until next time, take care of yourselves. And remember, your story isn't over yet. No matter what betrayals you've survived, no matter what darkness you've walked through, you're still here, still breathing, still capable of writing the next chapter. Make it a good one. Good night, everyone. See you in the next video.